Head of African Futures and Innovation at the ISS. Dr. Cilliers, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, Dr. Cilliers, of course, this conversation really comes at the back of the ANC's January 8th statement, specifically the events that led up to the celebrations and just some of the comments made by the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa in as far as the recent security concerns in the country are concerned. Now, you've just seen that video clip where we showed, the lights, coming out while the president was making that address in front of business leaders who essentially paid big money to be there. And the SAPS yesterday telling the media that someone deliberately disrupted electricity supply at the ANC gala dinner in Polokwane last night. Now, we can't take this in isolation of what has happened in the past. Talk to us about what this really speaks to. Should we be concerned? Is there a threat to this country, or at the very least to the ANC president?
I don't know whether there is a physical threat to him. Possibly the intelligence community have their suspicions, but given the state of the intelligence community, one doesn't know how serious to take that. But there certainly are very clear and deliberate efforts to embarrass the president and the ANC. And that is most likely from within the party, given its deep divisions. But it's also not impossible that it's from political opponents. We saw today a competitive rally being run by one of the competitors to the ANC. And the reality is that politics in South Africa has become a dirty business. That is evident by the reflections in the recent Zondo Commission report and what was aired at that commission of the abuse of state power. And we also know that in 2017, in the run-up to then the elective conference where President Ramaphosa was elected, that numerous ANC members were intimidated, some were even assassinated. Politics in South Africa has become something of a life and death struggle. And I'm afraid that 2022 is going to be a turbulent year. Whether that translates into a direct threat to the president, I doubt, but nobody knows. But we're all on edge. We're all concerned that stability does prevail and that our security instruments, of which we pay a significant amount of money for every year, that they are able to protect the president and able to provide stability. And unfortunately, the indications are that there is a significant amount of decay, incompetence, corruption, and perhaps even in some instances a lack of willingness to do so.
Now, you were on our program not too long ago, just really speaking about recent events that have happened in the country, specifically where national key points are concerned, threats to those national key points. And I'm talking here about the Parliament fire, as well as the attack on a constitutional court. And essentially, you were talking about just the inefficiencies in our law enforcement agencies. How big or how concerning are the inefficiencies within the SAPS? I mean, the SAPS yesterday, just the minister, in fact, admitting that somebody did, in fact, sabotage the electricity in a building where not only was the ANC president there, but also a lot of South Africa's leaders were in that same building. One would think that, in fact, that should never have happened. So just how severe and how wide is the extent of the inefficiencies? And I'm saying here law enforcement agencies, not just the SAPS.
Yeah, no, they are huge. They are massive. The best indication of that is simply to look at what's happening with trends on crime and investor confidence in South Africa, crime is increasing, particularly murder rates, and investor confidence is plummeting. We only have to look at the daily media reaction about the infighting within SAPS, about apparent murders in the top echelons of SAPS, the inability of SAPS to manage some of the basic functions that they have, let's call them firearms registration, the management of various assets, and their lack of ability to protect Parliament. So this all comes at a time where South Africa is in a difficult situation. The factional fighting within the ANC is spilled over into the rest of society, and this is going to be a difficult year. Yet, when we look at indications of what's happening with spending, the one area in which, I mean, apart from the fact that SABC's budget has gone through the roof, the one area that has received most spending above all is VIP protection, as politicians protect themselves. So it's quite inexplicable how that one issue, the protection of the most important person in our country, and his safety and the events where he is at, that is not secured. So one is concerned. But at the same time, this is not necessarily a threat to life or something like that. It is very clear efforts to embarrass the ANC and the leader, and one doesn't know where this comes from.
I mean, you know, historically in this country, anything that has to do with any form of security concern or threat, if it is under that ambit of politics, one is concerned, because we have seen, you know, lives being threatened, you know, in the political arena. But you're saying that these are clear and deliberate acts to embarrass the president. So what are we speaking about here? Are we talking about purely sabotage, looking at what is happening in the political sphere this year? I mean, you say this is likely to be a very turbulent year.
Yes, because, I mean, we have two factions within the governing party that are fighting life and death, and literally death. If one looks at what is happening in the taxi industry, in the gangs, some of there are linkages to senior ANC leaders, and the organized crime connections that have been opened up by the Zondo Commission. We still don't completely understand what allowed Bain to have the access that it had to President Zuma. What is behind their efforts to restructure the entire South African economy, including the extent to which President Zuma allowed SARS to be captured and was an active player in that process? Is this just Bain, a consulting company, or is there something, organized crime, something bigger behind this? We don't know. And with an intelligence agency particular that is entirely dysfunctional, as was reflected in the Mufamadi panel report, we are, as I've said a number of times, we are literally blind. And many of these problems are not big issues. They relate to fixing basics in the country. They relate to appointing permanent professional persons from within those agencies. There are many professionals, promoting them to manage those agencies, whether you're speaking of intelligence, police, correctional services, South African National Defence Force, instead of the temporary deployment of political cadres that are owe allegiance to a particular faction within the ANC. That is the first step that needs to happen within society, in South Africa, making sure that the undue political influence on our civil service, including our security establishment, is removed, not only in the interests of South Africa today, but also in future generations. Under the President Zuma, we allowed the complete politicization and factionalization of a large component of our civil service, including the security agencies. And many of our top leadership in those agencies are temporary appointments. They are very often do not have the qualifications to run that, and they are simply not up to the task. They serve a political agenda. We have to get this right. And these kind of things are not difficult to fix, but they take a degree of political will. And we can only look at the lack of action on the resolving the fight between the Minister of Police and his National Commissioner as a reflection of the challenges that we face. And these things are fixable.
And you bring some very valid points and also some fundamental points that speak to, as you've said, how we start dealing and taking action to these things. So, I mean, you've mentioned Bain and Co. You've also mentioned the problem and the concern with organized crime. One thing we also don't know and are nowhere near is the July unrest. I mean, the ANC
Yes.
president skimmed through, in terms of his comments about the July unrest. Of course, also saying things like, these should never happen again. I mean, even just the events of the past couple of days, the fire in Parliament, as well as the break-in at the Constitutional Court and the significant damage that was done in those two institutions, we also, again, don't know. So the question again about organized crime, what kind of action then is needed from this presidency to make sure that even the things that are uncovered in the first report of the Zondo Commission are, addressed, and as a country we can pick up the pieces and save this democracy?
We can turn things around. Let's look at the example of SARS, the Revenue Service. It was taken from a top-level functioning institution under the Mbeki administration and driven into the ground by state capture, by President Zuma and his cohorts, Bain and others. And yet, with the appointment of capable, competent people, it's turned itself around. It did that in 2 or 3 years. Amazing recovery. The same can happen in SABC. If we bring professional people in, same can happen with intelligence, but there needs to be much greater transparency. So, I go back to the essential challenge. It is because of a lack of willingness to act and a lack of coherence within the governing party that these things are allowed to happen. The example of what happened with SARS is an example of what can happen in other departments, but there must be a real willingness to take action. We can't have this ongoing, we launch an investigation into somebody, we suspend him, he remains on full pay for 6 months, whatever the case may be. We just allow this to carry on. This afternoon, President Ramaphosa spoke passionately about the need for discipline and action within the ANC, and that is where this needs to start. It needs to start with him, and action within cabinet, and action within the ANC, and then also, of course, taking that into government. And unless that happens, I'm afraid we'll face a much more turbulent year than perhaps we could normally expect. It's basic things that need to be taken in hand.
I'm hoping it's a year of action and not of turbulence, Dr. Cilliers. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.